Good afternoon. I hope you got to see the beautiful sunset that was out there today, and I hope you got to see the moon. It was a very full and exciting moon. If you turn over to Zechariah chapter 4, we'll get started there in just a little bit. I have something to admit. Sometimes when I teach a class, I feel like I have a laser focus, that I know exactly where we're going. And even though the class might feel a little topsy-turvy, it's all leading to one point. Sometimes when I teach a class, I feel like it's spaghetti, but then your guys' comments kind of help, and the Bible helps show the point, show the purpose. And I think it turns out well. Sometimes it feels like scrambled eggs. And unfortunately, I'm going to be serving you guys some scrambled eggs today in this class. And particularly the reason is, as I think our takeaway from chapter 4 is very clear. I think our takeaway is almost crystal clear, to me at least. However, I think that their takeaway and God's purpose and message that he was sending them, I think that is a little bit more confusing. And I think there's two interpretations that I have heard, one that I prefer and one that I think lacks a little bit. So just a little kind of present of mind for me. Bear with me. I apologize if it's a little too much scrambled in thought. I haven't decided how we're going to do anything tonight, unfortunately. So let's start reviewing a little bit in chapter 3. Chapter 3, chapter 4, and chapter 5, and maybe a little bit of chapter 6, deal with God preparing his people. So God has a plan. God is going to have his people rebuild Jerusalem, rebuild the temple. His glory is going to come to them again. And he has a lot of messianic prophecies that we've seen so far. But he has to deal with the fact that his high priest is a man who is sinful. We saw that lesson in chapter 3. He has to deal with that he has leadership that isn't even the king. This leadership is like a fake governor in a sense. And his leadership has kind of slowed down. And he has to deal with that the people themselves have been corrupted. They have wickedness. And so these chapters, chapter 3, 4, and 5, really hone in on what God's plan is to bring forth Jerusalem again as a holy city that God can return to, that God can again choose. And like I said, chapter 4 is all about Zerubbabel, more or less, and the governor king, and how God will deal with him and address him. So just a little bit reminder, chapter 3, we saw the high priest, and he was clothed in the filthy garments. How is he going to do his job like that? How is he going to be the intermediate between God and the people if himself is so sinful? And God addressed that problem by having the angel of the Lord take away his filthy, disgusting clothes and clothing him in new garment. And then right away we saw these imageries also of how these, in verses 8 and forward, how these, Joshua and his friends, would be symbols of those to come. So God's not hiding it. They're going to be a symbol of what we have today. We, through Christ, and we'll point out that some today. I just want to also point out that Mike made the comment about what if this rock was the rock that we see in Daniel 2, I believe it is, the rock that is cut from the mountain, not from man's hands, rolls over and destroys all the kingdoms, Babylon, Medo-Persian, Rome, all those kingdoms, that statue of gold and different materials. One thing supporting that Austin pointed out the other day, is that the stone that has 7 eyes can be translated 7 facets, as if 7 different cuts. So it would paint a little bit of a different picture rather than this be an all-knowing rock, but a perfect rock, like God's perfect kingdom. So I just wanted to point out that because I thought that was a very helpful thought that I hadn't thought about. So, and those two comments really coincided there. So let's get into chapter 4. This is about Zerubbabel, the governor Zerubbabel, who acts like a king in many different ways. Read with me as we go in verses 1 through 3. Chapter 4, 1 through 3. And the angel who talked with me came again and woke me, like a man who was awakened out of his sleep. And he said to me, "What do you see?" I said, "I see and behold a lampstand all of gold, with a bowl on the top of it, and 7 lamps on it, with 7 lips on each of the lamps that are on the top of it. And there are 2 olive trees by it, one on the right of the bowl and the one on the left of the bowl." So we've got an image. I'll very poorly and roughly sketch this out. So we've got this bowl on this lampstand, and forgive my lampstand. So we're going to say this has 7 arms of some form. And then it seems like, to me at least, that there's kind of lips on each of these little guys that equal 7. And maybe it's saying that these are the flames here. So maybe that's the imagery that it's saying. But there's these perfection of numbers, the perfection of 7. And then what stands on the right and the left of this lampstand? 2 olive trees. So, and then someone look in verse 12 real quick. What else do we know about these olive trees that are standing on the side of this lampstand? Exactly. There's these 2 branches particularly that are dripping golden oil into the bowl. So I just want to draw this here because this is a pretty significant thing to understand this vision and why he's given them. One thing, I debated whether or not I wanted to say this right away or not. These 2 trees, we're going to call these types. We're going to say this is like a priest and this is like a kingship. So right away, if you look in verse 12, it says, "And a second time I answered and said to him, 'What are these 2 branches of olive trees which are beside the 2 golden pipes, from which golden oil is poured out?' He said to me, 'Do you not know what these are?' 'No, my Lord.' Then he said, 'These are the 2 anointed ones who stand by the Lord of the whole host,'" or the Lord of the whole earth. Don't get too distracted just yet on those points. But we know that these are the 2 anointed ones. Biblically, what 2 group of people do we see get anointed? Priest and kings. Priest and kings. So very simply, we're just going to say this is a king tree. And then, I should have thought. We're just going to say this is a priest tree. I don't know that one. So just to make it a little simple, king tree, priest tree, but olive oil is coming out of a branch. So it's coming out of one of these guys on each side. So it's not as if the whole tree currently is giving olive oil, but that these olive trees side by side support and give olive oil to this through a branch that we are focusing on and see. Does that make sense now, how we can see? So I'm just going to label these real quick. So king tree, this is going to be Zerubbabel. And then priest tree, this is going to be Joshua. I'm going to get that all out of the way right away. I've been uncertain whether or not we should do that. But I think that the interpretation for them will become a little bit more clear if we just get the picture out there and kind of see what God is pointing to. All right, so we've established that we have these olive trees, these 2 branches feeding the lamp. I don't think that God using the lampstand here is an accident. What are they trying to build? The temple. the temple. Remember, these lampstands, these would have been temple gold objects that were in the temple. I don't know how to say that. These would have been things associated with the temple. This would have been a very intimate connection. I have no doubt in my mind, no doubt at all, that the people of Israel would have instantly got this connection here, especially when they were laboring to build the temple, laboring to do God's will. Now, here's where we'll get a little philosophical. In the temple, there was the showbread. In the temple, there was the altar of incense in this area here. But it would have been dark. What would this lamp do? Well, light. But think a little bit more of it. Let's say you're a priest and God tells you to do certain duties. You need that light. Don't you desperately need the delight? Even in Leviticus chapter 24, they were told to keep it burning. They were told to trim the wicks or something like that to keep and maintain this light. This light was special. This light was important. And this light required two groups of people, in a sense, to keep up and running. Like we talked about, Leviticus said the priest must keep it trimmed, must keep it lit, must keep it maintained. But then also, the king was supposed to protect and support the priest. So in a sense, we already see how the king and the priest allow this light to exist. Any comments or thoughts on this lamppost and the light? All right, so yeah, Mike.
I'll do it in another direction. Christ is the light, and he's going to be a priest and a king, and the light will never go out.
That's an excellent point. We will definitely, I think you've seen right to the end. This is where I say that our purpose for this example, this imagery, is more clear than I think kind of what their purpose of this example. And I think you're right. It's very obvious that Jesus is the light of the world that is never going to go out. If you remember in Revelations when we studied it, it talked about how they didn't need the sun, they didn't need the moon, which my comments about the sun and moon today were not purposeful. They were just happenstance. But now thinking about it, they didn't need the sun and they didn't need the moon because they had God. And it also explicitly says that they had Jesus, who was the lamp. Excellent connection, Mike. Matt.
Are you going to talk about verse 6 at all? I have a comment about it. I don't want to get it.
Let's see. Yes, yeah. We are going forward to go backwards. So I appreciate that. Yeah, this chapter is a little bit weird how it happens because he shows this vision. He doesn't finish showing it. He doesn't finish explaining it or going where he is. And then he starts talking about Zerubbabel preparing his people, like we've said. All right, so we've talked about this lamp was a continual lamp to help them worship the Lord. It relied on the priest. In a sense, it relied on the king. But it allowed them to minister. It allowed them to do incense, allowed them to do showbread. But we still had no temple. We still had no temple at this point. So if you have a vision, if you are a Jewish person and God is giving you a vision of the lampstand, put yourself in that mindset with me real quick. We don't have a temple, and God is going to give you a vision of one of the implements of the worships of the temple. You still are in a place where you're like, man, we don't have the temple. Are we failing the Lord? Are we making mistakes to the Lord? Like, what should we do? What can I do better? I bet Zechariah is especially feeling that. And maybe just Joshua, the high priest, was feeling that out after hearing the prophecy of chapter 3, the imagery of him in those dirty garments. What do you guys think about that? What would you think if you're like, okay, so Zechariah now has seen a vision of the lamppost. Would you think it would be positive? Would you think it would be negative? What's your guys' thoughts on that? Yeah, you feel like it'd be a positive, a sign that maybe the temple is coming back. Would anyone be, maybe it's like the sad sight, maybe. And I'm wondering if it's like, there is no temple. This lamp is out in the wilderness where trees grow. And I wonder if anyone would have thought of it like that initial reaction, like lamppost and the trees. Think about, a very poor example. Think about your refrigerator. It's like, I got a really nice refrigerator that I really, really appreciate. Now put it in your garage. It's like, that's not its place. That's not its purpose. So I think there's a lot of imagery. There's a lot riding on this. And the people are probably perking up when thinking about the temple. Yeah, LaDonna.
I was just thinking, about the trees, it kind of took me back to the garden. So it's even better than the temple. Because, in a temple, a lot of this imagery of the garden, you're got two organic, things coming out of the trees.
Yeah.
So it gives you very positive.
I definitely agree. I think chapter 6 will clarify a little bit more of why this is a positive thing, why we want this lamppost outside of the temple with these trees supporting it. I think as Christians, we can kind of naturally show and assume that. But I think in a sense for them, it might be an imagery of just a stark reminder of the temple, the lampstand is not in the temple. So excellent question, though. Excellent question. Now, I think there's a lot of purpose behind it, but that initial reaction might just be a scary reminder that it's not in the temple. Let's move down to verse 10b. We're going to finish with this lamppost, lampstand, and then we're going to move over to the different things about Zerubbabel and why God is purposeful about this. So read with me chapter 10b through 14 real quick. These 7, talking about, I believe, the flame, the lights on top of the lampstand. These 7 are the eyes of the Lord, which range through the whole earth. Then I said to him, what are these 2 olive trees on the right and the left of the lampstand? And then he goes and he explains that these are the 2 anointed ones that stand before the Lord of the whole earth. So he gives us a hint that either these 7, the only things in this chapter that have 7, from my understanding, are either the lips on the bowls or the 7 lights, or the 7 lampstands. So you guys see that right here. So this is what I mean when I say this chapter is very broken up, because he almost starts to answer him in verse 5 when he says, "Do you not know what these are?" But then he gets distracting. So we're hiding the distraction real quick so we can discuss the lamppost, and then we're going to go back to the distraction and flesh out how powerful of an imagery this is. So he says, these 7 are the eyes of the Lord which range through the whole earth. This is interesting. I think that this is powerful because I think it directly contrasts what the lampstand would have done in the temple. Remember how we talked about if you were in the holy place, you needed that light. God particularly told them where to shine the light towards in that lampstand so that they could minister, so that they could do things with it. But what is the light this time? What is these lampstands light this time? It's the 7 eyes of the Lord. Or these 7 are the eyes of the Lord, the complete picture of the Lord. I would like to submit to you that I think the interpretation of this is that Zerubbabel, who if you look in verse, let's see here. Look in verse 10. It says, "For whoever despises the days of small things shall rejoice," in verse 10. That Zerubbabel, the captain, the governor of small things, This is showing that what Zerubbabel is doing, how he is giving to God, is feeding God's eye, and God's eye is seeing. I think it's saying that, and we'll go to Zerubbabel and what he's doing, but I think it's God saying, I know. I have noticed what you consider small, what you consider insignificant of how you're serving me. This wonderful oil is there, and my eye is upon you. That is what I believe is the interpretation of this. So as we move in to Zerubbabel and see what he's doing, I think this is a very warming thing for him to be aware of. This is just a very fantastic thought for him. Any thoughts or comments on that so far? Yeah, Dan.
If you search just the term eyes of the Lord, you find a bunch of verses. In Psalm 33, it says, behold, the eye of the Lord is on those who fear him and those who hope on him in steadfast love. But very interestingly, in Proverbs 15:3, it says, the eyes of the Lord are in every place, keeping watch on the evil and the good, which points right into what you're talking about here.
Yeah, thank you for the verse. I think that's a...
God knows because his eyes see everything.
Yeah. And isn't that something that we're kind of tempted to feel sometimes too? That, one, I think we're easily to feel like what I do is just little things. Like, did that even make a difference in serving God's kingdom? Did that even make a difference? And it's easy for us to feel, did God even notice? Like, is this pleasing to him? We all want to be the one that when the Lord comes, he says, well done, faithful servant. I put you in charge of little things and you've done great. We don't want him saying, well done, mediocre servant. I put you in charge of little things. And I think you did some little things. I didn't hear any bad reports. But Zerubbabel is told that you are feeding the eyes of the Lord with what you're doing. And the Lord sees. That's how I take it. So, excellent points. Any thoughts or comments on that right now? We will circle back to the lamppost just in a little bit. Yeah.
In terms of the little thing, I've looking up a couple of references in my Bible, and it went back to the foundation that Zerubbabel was making, and how it's pointed out that it's nothing compared to the original temple. But yet it's what God wanted. It might seem like a little thing to us, but if we're doing what God wants, that's all that counts.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, you're talking about how, some of those who remembered the old temple saw the new temple's foundation and they cried, which is very sad. And it says in Ezra 5, I think, it says that you couldn't tell the difference between who was crying and who was rejoicing. And so that, that definitely feels like this small thing, but I really like how you pointed out, if this is what the Lord asked, don't consider it a small thing. Don't you dare consider that small to the Lord, because that's what he's asked of you. Excellent point. I really appreciate that. Yeah, Vicky.
I was thinking, it said that, like, if you give a cup of cold water, because if you do something small like that, God notices. And even with like being a Christian or children, God's angels watch and they see. So it's comforting to know that God's eyes are everywhere, and that even if you do a small thing like give someone some water, God notices.
Yeah, we very, very thoroughly know that the eyes of the Lord are on us, and he looks in favor when we do good. So, and also the scary side of that, to remember that the eyes of the Lord are on us. Yeah, Jonathan and Doug.
I've wondered, what would it be like being Ezra or Zerubbabel in this position? You have a job to do. I'm sure it had to be in their mind of how in the world, or what is this going to actually accomplish? Your nation is still basically destroyed, even though we had some people come back. Great. It's not what it was. Not only is the temple not what it was, your nation is not what it was. It's not going. can only think that Zerubbabel, hearing this, would be like, okay, it's working, not sure how, not sure it's gonna keep working, but that would be an encouragement of God sees what's going on, and basically keep doing what you're doing.
I think that first statement you said would be a very fearful one, because if you think, it didn't work before, did it? You know, like they had the grand temple, they had David and Solomon and all these other people, and it didn't work for them, and now it's my turn to help? I'm not even a king. I'm not even anointed. And this is all we could accomplish, you know, and I think you're right. It's if the Lord says it's working, if the Lord is behind it, that's what we should focus on. Let's start looking and look through. Oh, sorry, Doug. Yeah, go ahead.
So the original temple has been destroyed, now they're rebuilding the temple, correct?
Yes. So Cyrus gave the proclamation in his first year that we see in Second Chronicles, the end of Second Chronicles, return, let the Jewish people rebuild the temple to the Lord. So that was during Cyrus. They built the foundation, from my understanding, and then Artaxerxes took over, and bad reports and bad letters about what they were doing was sent to Artaxerxes, and Artaxerxes is like, whoa, nothing dangerous to the king should happen, and so he puts a stop to it. So then it stops for those 17 years or so, 12 years. And then King Darius comes on, and that's kind of where Zechariah comes back. So the temple foundation, I believe, is rebuilt during Darius. So, but let me double check that.
That's okay. So Zerubbabel, did I say that right?
Yeah, Zerubbabel, yeah.
Is being charged with building the temple. That's what I'm gathering.
Yes, yeah.
He's holding the plumb line.
Yep, exactly.
So he's the guy who's going to rebuild the temple.
Exactly. And let's look and see how much more he's charged with rebuilding the temple. So look in chapter 4, and we're going to read 4 through 7. And I said to the angel of the Lord who talked with me, "What are these, my Lord?" And remember, the vision of the lamp was brought up for just a second. Then the angel who talked with me answered and said to me, "Do you not know what these are?" I said, "No, my Lord." Then he answered to me, "This is the word of the Lord to Zerubbabel. Not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts. Who are you, O great mountain? Before Zerubbabel you shall become a plain, and he shall bring forward the top stone amid shouts of grace, grace to it." So Zechariah asks for these answers. He's like, what's going on? What is this? And the angel's like, oh, don't you know? Don't you know? Which makes me believe even more that it's this temple imagery. He's like, aren't you aware of what the lampstand is? But he gets distracted. And he gets distracted telling them about Zerubbabel, the word of the Lord to Zerubbabel. So let's look at the challenges that face Zerubbabel. So there's two kind of things that is going to come before Zerubbabel that he has to do. In in verse 7, what challenges is Zerubbabel facing? Yeah, Mike.
The city and the temple's been destroyed, and all this is rubble there on that mountain. It says here, and when Zerubbabel was done, they acclaimed the temple.
I love that literal interpretation. You grasped onto that so fast. I appreciate that. That took me a long while to be like, oh, maybe that's what the mountain's talking about. I think that's the correct interpretation. I think it's a very, you have to start over. You have to tear away. And Zerubbabel, either physically, literally the rubble that he was against, had to take that all away and start with the plumb line, start fresh, start new so he could build up, start on a good plane. Or it could be the mountain of those enemies. It could be any mountain here particularly, but I really endorse the rubble idea also. What also do we see? What other challenge that he accomplishes do we see there too? in verse 7. Still has some building imagery to it. What do you see?
The top stone.
Yeah. So this like capstone or this keystone he's putting on. And I think this is the Lord saying, all of your challenges, all your problems, from start to completion, I'm there with you. And it's cool because there's even this joy when he puts up the capstone. Because remember how sorrowful and how sad it was when we talked about how there was weeping and there was joy sometimes, but you couldn't tell the difference? But he says, we're going to get rid of this rubble, this mountain before you. It's gone. You are going to put the capstone on, and you are going to be shouting grace, grace to it, just exuberant, appreciative. And I think that's just such an exciting thing for Zerubbabel to hear. Matt.
I also think, I'm interested to hear what you think or anybody else thinks. In verse 6, God's statement, it will not be by might or by power, but by God's Spirit. I think that definitely shows that it's not going to be because they're great and they're mighty, they're going to accomplishment. It's by God. But also, when God helps them, you don't see him working very many miracles. Like in the book of Esther, God is clearly helping them, but it's not like his name isn't used, and you don't see miracles happening. You don't see miracles in Nehemiah. You don't see, as far as I know, miracles in Ezra. But God is clearly working with them. And I wonder if that's part of it too. God's letting them know he's going to be helping them, but they shouldn't be expecting him to split the Red Sea or drop fire from heaven. They need to trust God and do their work and trust the Spirit's going to make it work out.
That is a really interesting thought and a really interesting point, because I think you are completely correct. I'll have to dwell on that a little bit. Anyone else have any thoughts or comments on that? I think, when they're going through it, I think you're correct. God doesn't give explicit miracles, but he does support them in how they live as godly people, gets them through and accomplishes what they should. Yeah, Doug.
So at the end of verse 7, it says, and grace to it. Does anybody have that, like, grace word from Blue Letter Bible or whatever? But because I have rarely seen the word grace in the Old Testament. I'm curious to find out, why is grace being said here? I don't think I ever saw grace in the Old Testament.
It's often translated favor. It's favor, grace, charm, and it's
unmerited favor or unearned favor, a gift. I'm making a parallel with grace.
it's
Grace
used almost
through Jesus.
yeah, it's used almost 70 times in the Old Testament. It means favor and grace, like we would know.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a connection. I definitely think it's a connection to that idea of, not by might, not by power, but my Spirit. Zerubbabel, as he's completing the temple, is acknowledging, that this wasn't me. This wasn't, but he's saying that this is the grace of God that has allowed this to happen. This is all through his favor, all through his choice. So, but good question. Good question. Yeah.
When I was reading this, getting ready for class, I didn't think of this, but, when I don't know how old Zechariah was, but when he's saying, what are these? And the angel says, don't you know? And he says, no, where I don't know. He might not have had any idea about the furniture that was in the tabernacle and the temple.
That's a really good point. I don't know what evidence to support it, but I have heard that Zechariah was likely younger than 20. Take that with a big grain of salt, because I'm really not sure why that claim was made. But I'll have to look into that. But that's a really good point. It could be, even if he's younger than 30, even if he's younger than 70, he might not have been very aware of the temple and its functions, in a sense, what it would look like and what he would see. Yeah.
Unless he read Exodus.
Well, yeah, that's true. Even I read Exodus and I try to picture the. Yeah, good point. Good point. Brother Legg, yes.
We mentioned the fact that the Lord expects his people to do what they can and depend on him to do what they can. And just thinking of a simple example of Jesus at the tomb of Lazarus. He walked up to the tomb and he could have motioned the stone away, but he had them remove the stone. And then of course, Lazarus called Lazarus. Lazarus came out, but he was still bound in the burial garments or clothing. And so instead of Jesus again doing something miraculous, he said to the people nearby, "Loose him, let him go." And so they had done their part. They had complimented the miracle of Jesus by doing what they could do.
That's an excellent example of what we're seeing God calling Zerubbabel to do here, to work, and then God will supply the Spirit. That's an excellent thought. Excellent thought. Yeah, Jim.
Yeah, that's a really what you better more about the term race. I was thinking, there was an atheist, a lot of people probably remember, Christopher Hitchens. He was one of the best looking, he was one of the best known atheists. And that's what he wanted to get. Where's the grace in the Old Testament? Where's the grace? He sees the grace in the where's the grace? And he's focused on God's judgments. Okay. But there is grace. There's a lot of grace in it. I mean, you see it here. You see Noah found grace in the eyes of God. You see Nineveh found grace. Right? But what in all through Isaiah, all the promises that he made, God was more than willing to bestow grace upon his people. But they wouldn't listen to him. They rebelled against him, refused to listen to his prophets. Right? And so this is what they got.
Yeah, even in stories that we don't explicitly see grace, it's there. You're very right. Excellent point. Excellent point. God's grace has always been steadfast, and he's always been willing to accept the people if they will repent, if they will turn to him. Excellent points. Zerubbabel, yeah, Dan.
One small thing, it was one of those things as you were reading, the picture just came to my mind in verse 7, where he says, "O great mountain, you shall become a plain." That we know from archaeologists' work that cities and towns that were built up that were destroyed for whatever reason, they didn't remove the rubble, they just filled in and built on top of it, and that's how we got the tells that we had in Israel. And it's like, that parallel picture, I was just like, wow, is that what he's talking about? They're just going to start over and build anew on top of what was destroyed? It's like, I don't know. I kind of scratched my head to say, should I mention that or not? But it's like an interesting picture in my mind to go, the Lord made good out of what was terrible because he built over top of it with good things.
That's an interesting thought. Now, it'd be hard to look back, not at this temple's destruction that we see renewed, but at that temple's destruction that we see renewed. If you knew what I mean, not the Romans' destruction, but the Babylonian destruction. But that's an interesting thought. So who knows? The power of it is not necessarily saying you got it all flat already, but the idea is that there's this just feelingly insurmountable task, but with God's grace, with God's power, the top stone itself can be completed. So let's move on to Zerubbabel here. And so as Zerubbabel is given this answer of not by might, not by power, but my Spirit, he's told, you're not alone, Zerubbabel. You're not alone with what you're going on through. I'm there with you, and it's my Spirit that's doing the hard things. And that's a powerful answer, but it's also a humbling answer for Zerubbabel. That it's not me, it's God. And let's move on because Zerubbabel has been humbled before. And we're going to see how. Let's read verses 8 through 10. Then the word of the Lord came to me, saying, the hands of Zerubbabel have laid the foundation of this house. His hands shall also complete it. Then you will know that the Lord of hosts has sent me to you. For whoever has despised the day of small things shall rejoice, and shall see the plumb line in the hand of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel has laid the foundation, and he has now received the promise of the Lord that he shall complete it, which he does. He does complete it. And then the interesting part is, look at the next verse. I think the next verse, just like not by might, not by power, but by my spirit, such a meaty verse. I think there's also a very meaty verse here for us too. Verse 10, for whoever has despised the day of small things shall be put in the corner and beaten, shall be told to apologize. For whoever has despised the day of small things shall rejoice, and shall see the plumb line in the hand of Zerubbabel. God tells them it's going to get done. But what is God's outlook in doing it? Was he displeased with the people for their hearts at first? Or is he more looking to encourage them? I think this is a beautiful passage here. And I think that God is saying the lampstand to just remember that his presence is there with them. His eyes are upon all of this. And he knows that this temple looks less impressive than that other temple. He knows. He's seen. He knows those who have despised the day of small things. But God wants you to rejoice in those days of small things. God wants you to have known that he was there the whole time. And all he wants you to do is rejoice in the little victories that he gives us to us. I think this is so meaty. I think this is such a beautiful passage. What does it mean to despise? Brainstorm with me. What does it mean to despise the day of small things? Yeah, Doug.
I think you have to look at the history, why did the temple get destroyed in the first place? It was because of disobedience, idolatry, all the things that caused God's anger to be kindled over and over and over and over. And so I think that's kind of saying, it doesn't matter the size of the temple, I'm still here with you.
Yeah, I think he definitely is saying that that's not the purpose. The size is not the purpose. But it's the Lord working, the Lord going through these things. I just want to remind us, we'll move on from this thought just so we can touch a little bit what of the lampstand means more to us. But dwell on this despising the small things. I think this is an attitude that we can get into. I think it's an attitude that very easily can overcome us as Christians. That it's like, oh, I just had a conversation with a coworker, went nowhere. Or, oh, I only didn't sin for this day. Great. Or, oh, I had a conversation with my brother who I was angry at, and we didn't fight as much and we smoothed the water. I personally know I need to work on my attitude of praising God in those small victories and making sure that I bring those to the Lord and say, I don't know if this was you here. I don't know if this was maybe like Matt's, talking about that the Spirit of the Lord is just not a miraculous spirit that we see as much in like parting the Red Sea, but those who follow the Lord do right. And maybe it's that, but this small thing, Lord, I'd like to praise you for it. I'd like to thank you for what you've done. I'd like to rejoice, and do that and change your outlook and be more gracious and be more thankful, because after dwelling on this for a while, I think this is a great way. If you want to become a more thankful to God's person, I think this is a fantastic way to start, to remind yourself, don't despise the small things. Don't despise the small things. All right. You can talk to me about that later. We're going to quickly wrap up with this imagery of the lampstand real quick. I'm sorry. We're just going to quickly well, actually, go ahead. We have no time. Go ahead, Matt.
Well, I just wanted to be clear. I think God was helping them. I don't think it was just God's people doing. I think he was just helping them in ways that weren't big and obvious.
Not might, not power, but by, yes. I definitely agree. Or I see what your opinion and question is, and I'll have to get back on that too. So we're going to end there. We're going to start in review. We'll talk a little bit about how this lampstand applies to us. But one thing I'll remind you is that Zerubbabel and Joshua, they're branches. They're not the whole tree. And I think the true king, the true priest, is Jesus. He's the one supporting them. He's the one totally on their side, totally with them. And I think that is a comforting thought to them too, that you're just a branch. You're not getting the olive oil directly just from you. It's not just being squeezed out from you, but it's from Jesus, and it's going to God, and God sees your work. God sees your benefit. And we'll just talk tomorrow, or we'll talk next week, just a little bit about how this applies to us. So just in lieu of time, we're going to go ahead and end there. Thank you all for your comments. Thank you all for your attention.